Hello, and welcome to the Drowsy Professor. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight, to this quiet space where we explore the gentle mysteries hidden within the very fabric of life itself. As you settle in wherever you are, perhaps nestled under soft blankets as the day winds down, or curled up in your favorite chair as evening settles around you, I'd love for you to let me know where in the world and at what time you're watching. There's something wonderfully comforting about knowing we're sharing this peaceful moment together, even across whatever distances separate us. Now, take a moment to get truly comfortable. Adjust your pillows, let your shoulders drop just a little, and take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air fill your lungs gently, then release it with a soft sigh. Tonight, we're going on a very special journey together. One that will take us deep into the microscopic world that exists within every cell of your body, where an ancient story has been quietly writing itself for thousands upon thousands of years. We'll be exploring how the invisible threads of DNA connect you to every person who has ever lived, creating a vast family tree that stretches back through time like the roots of an enormous ancient oak. But don't worry about remembering every detail or following every scientific term. This isn't a test, and there's no need to stay alert or take notes. Instead, think of this as a gentle drift through the hidden connections that make us all part of one great human family, where you can let the words wash over you like soft waves, carrying you toward rest while painting pictures of the beautiful web of relationships that connect every living soul. Let your breathing slow naturally as we begin, and know that whether you listen to every word or simply let the sound of the story guide you towards sleep, you're exactly where you need to be. Imagine, if you will, that somewhere deep inside your body, in a place so small you could never see it with your naked eye, there exists a library more vast and more carefully organized than any collection of books ever assembled by human hands. This library exists not in a grand building with towering shelves and reading rooms, but within the tiny nucleus of nearly every cell in your body, written in a language so elegant and precise that it makes even the most sophisticated computer code seem simple by comparison. This is the library of DNA, and every page of every book in this microscopic collection tells part of the story of who you are, where you came from, and how you're connected to every other human being who has ever walked upon this earth. It's a story written in molecules so small that millions of them could dance on the head of a pin, yet so powerful that they contain the instructions for building and maintaining every aspect of your physical existence. As you rest comfortably wherever you are, breathing slowly and deeply, try to imagine this invisible library that travels with you everywhere you go. It's there right now, in the cells of your skin, in the tissues of your muscles, in the delicate structures of your brain that are processing these very words. Every heartbeat, every breath, every gentle movement as you settle deeper into comfort is guided by the instructions written in this ancient code that has been passed down to you through an unbroken chain of ancestors stretching back to the very dawn of human existence. The beauty of this genetic library is that it's not just a collection of instructions for making you who you are today. It's also a historical record, a kind of molecular diary that has been kept continuously for hundreds of thousands of years, recording the journeys of your ancestors as they moved across continents, adapted to new environments, and passed their experiences down through the generations in the form of tiny changes in the DNA code itself. Think of DNA as being somewhat like a very long sentence, written in an alphabet that has only 4 letters, but repeated millions of times in different combinations to create meaning. These 4 chemical letters, scientists call them T, G, and C, are arranged in sequences that spell out the instructions for life in much the same way that the 26 letters of our familiar alphabet can be arranged to spell out stories, poems, and the accumulated wisdom of human civilization. But unlike the books in an ordinary library, which remain the same each time you read them, the book of DNA is constantly being copied and passed along, and in that process of copying, tiny changes occasionally occur. Most of these changes are so small they don't affect anything important, like a single letter in a massive encyclopedia being accidentally changed from one edition to the next. But over time, these small changes accumulate, creating a kind of molecular fingerprint that tells the story of where a particular copy of the DNA has traveled through time and space. It's these tiny changes, these gentle variations in the ancient code, that allow scientists to trace the pathways that connect you to your ancestors and to discover relationships between people who might never have suspected they were related. Every person carries within their cells a unique combination of these molecular signatures, like a passport that has been stamped by every generation that came before them, recording their journey through deep time. As you lie there, breathing slowly and peacefully, consider the remarkable fact that the DNA in your cells is not entirely your own creation. Parts of it came from your mother, parts from your father, and those parts came from their parents, and so on, stretching back through an unbroken chain that connects you to every human ancestor you've ever had. But it goes even deeper than that. Mixed in with the DNA that makes you distinctly human, there are also traces of much older stories, genetic echoes from cousins of humanity who lived tens of thousands of years ago and whose DNA occasionally mingled with that of our own species. The process of reading these ancient stories written in DNA is something like being a detective who specializes in very old, very subtle clues. Scientists have learned to extract DNA from tiny samples, sometimes just a swab from the inside of someone's cheek, sometimes a single hair, sometimes ancient bones that have been preserved for thousands of years, and then use sophisticated techniques to read the molecular letters in just the right places to reveal the hidden connections between people separated by vast distances and enormous spans of time. When researchers first began to understand how to read these genetic stories, they made discoveries that fundamentally changed our understanding of human history and human relationships. They found that all human beings, regardless of what part of the world they come from or what they look like, are far more closely related to each other than anyone had ever imagined. The genetic differences between any two people chosen at random from anywhere on Earth are remarkably small, much smaller than the differences you might find between two chimpanzees living in the same forest. This discovery revealed something beautiful and profound about our species, that despite all the obvious differences in appearance, language, and culture that distinguish different groups of people, at the molecular level, we are all part of one great human family. The DNA in your cells carries signatures that connect you not just to people who look like you or come from the same part of the world, but to every human population that has ever existed, woven together in a tapestry of relationship that spans the entire globe. As you continue to breathe deeply and let yourself relax more completely, try to picture this vast network of genetic connections spreading out from where you are right now, like invisible threads reaching across oceans and continents to touch every other person alive today, and stretching backward through time to connect you to ancestors whose names have been forgotten, but whose genetic legacy lives on in your cells. It's a network more complex and more beautiful than any human technology has ever created, built not by conscious design, but by the simple fact that all human beings share common ancestors if you go back far enough in time. The time scales involved in these genetic stories are vast enough to dwarf ordinary human experience, yet intimate enough to feel personal and immediate. Some of the connections revealed by DNA go back just a few generations, allowing people to discover relatives they never knew they had, sometimes living just a few towns away. Other connections reach back hundreds of generations, revealing how populations that seem completely distinct are actually branches of the same ancient family tree. One of the most remarkable aspects of DNA as a historical record is its reliability. Unlike written histories, which can be lost or altered or misremembered, the genetic record is written in molecules that are incredibly stable and difficult to change. The DNA in your cells carries information that has been transmitted with remarkable accuracy through hundreds of thousands of years of human history, creating a record of our species' journey that is more complete and more trustworthy than any other historical source we have. Yet this ancient library is not just a passive record of the past. It's also a living, dynamic system that continues to write new chapters even as you rest peacefully tonight. Every time DNA is copied and passed on to the next generation, there's the possibility of new variations appearing, new molecular signatures being added to the great book of human genetics. Your own DNA represents a unique chapter in this ongoing story, a combination of genetic information that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same form. The scientists who study these genetic stories often describe their work as a kind of archaeology, but instead of digging in the ground to uncover ancient artifacts, they're digging into the molecular structure of life itself to uncover the artifacts of genetic history. They use tools that can read the sequence of chemical letters in DNA with incredible precision, machines that can process thousands of genetic samples and compare them to vast databases of genetic information from people all over the world. This genetic archaeology has revealed stories that are both surprising and deeply moving. It has shown how human populations have migrated across the globe, how they've adapted to new environments, how they've mixed and mingled and separated and come together again in patterns that create the rich diversity of humanity we see today. It has revealed unexpected connections between populations that seemed completely unrelated and unexpected separations between populations that seemed obviously connected. As you let yourself sink deeper into the comfortable embrace of rest, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the world settling into evening, consider the profound truth that you are not alone in this vast universe. The DNA in your cells connects you to a family so large and so extended that it includes every human being who has ever lived or ever will live. You carry within your body the molecular signatures of ancestors who survived ice ages and droughts, who crossed oceans and climbed mountains, who fell in love and raised children and passed their genetic legacy forward to the next generation. Some of your ancestors were farmers who learned to coax food from the soil. Others were hunters who tracked game across vast landscapes. Some lived in great cities and some in small villages. Some traveled great distances and some lived their entire lives in the same valley where they were born. But all of them contributed something to the genetic heritage that lives on in your cells. All of them are part of the ancient story that DNA continues to tell about the remarkable journey of our species. The general process of genetic inheritance that connects you to this vast family operates according to laws so reliable and so predictable that scientists can use them to trace relationships with remarkable precision. Yet there's something almost magical about the way this process works. The way that tiny molecular changes can accumulate over generations to create readable patterns that reveal the hidden connections between people separated by vast distances and enormous spans of time. As you continue to breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the day's tensions dissolve into the soft comfort of evening, you might find it soothing to contemplate the quiet patience of this genetic record-keeping. For hundreds of thousands of years, through wars and migrations, through climate changes and cultural transformations, through all the dramatic events that have shaped human history, the DNA in our cells has continued its quiet work of recording and preserving and transmitting the story of our species from one generation to the next. This ancient library that exists within your cells is both incredibly complex and beautifully simple. Complex because it contains more information than could be read in several lifetimes, yet simple because it operates according to basic principles that anyone can understand. The 4 chemical letters of the genetic alphabet combine and recombine in patterns that create infinite variety. Yet the rules that govern these combinations are as reliable as mathematics, as predictable as the movements of the stars. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore some of the most fascinating stories that this genetic library has revealed, stories about how DNA has allowed researchers to trace the pathways of human migration across the globe, to discover unexpected relationships between populations that seemed completely unrelated, and to reveal the presence of ancient human cousins whose genetic legacy still lives on in our cells today. But for now, as you rest peacefully in the growing quiet of the evening, it's enough to simply appreciate the remarkable fact that you are part of this ancient story, connected by invisible molecular threads to every other member of the vast human family that has been writing its genetic story for countless generations. As you settle deeper into the gentle embrace of rest, your breathing becoming slower and more rhythmic with each passing moment. Imagine that you could somehow shrink down to a size so small that you could walk through the landscape of your own body, exploring the hidden world that exists within every cell. This journey would take you into a realm where the most important conversations happen not in words or sounds, but in a chemical language so ancient and so fundamental that it has been spoken continuously for billions of years, connecting every living thing on Earth in an unbroken conversation that began with the very first spark of life. This is the language of DNA, written not in letters that you could read with your eyes, but in molecules that speak to each other through the elegant precision of chemical bonds and molecular shapes. It's a language that operates far below the threshold of conscious awareness, yet it governs every aspect of your existence, from the color of your eyes to the rhythm of your heartbeat, from the way your body processes the food you eat to the subtle variations that make you uniquely yourself among all the billions of people who have ever lived. The beauty of this molecular language lies not just in its complexity, but in its remarkable consistency. Unlike human languages, which change and evolve and sometimes disappear entirely, the chemical language of DNA has remained fundamentally the same throughout the entire history of life on Earth. A molecule of DNA extracted from your cells today would be perfectly readable by the same biological machinery that operated in the cells of your ancestors who lived thousands of years ago, creating a continuity of communication that spans vast reaches of time. Picture, if you will, the inside of one of your cells as a bustling but peaceful workshop, where thousands of molecular machines work together with the quiet efficiency of a well-organized library staff. Each of these machines knows exactly what its job is, not because anyone taught it or programmed it, but because the instructions for its construction and operation are written in the DNA sequences that reside in the cell's nucleus, like a master manual that contains the blueprints for every piece of equipment in the workshop. At the heart of this cellular workshop lies the nucleus, a membrane-bound chamber that houses the precious library of DNA like a climate control vault protecting ancient manuscripts. The DNA itself is organized into structures called chromosomes, which you might think of as being like enormous scrolls, each one containing thousands of individual genes that serve as chapters in the great book of biological instruction. When you imagine these chromosomes, picture them not as static documents gathering dust on a shelf, but as dynamic, living texts that are constantly being read and interpreted by the cellular machinery. Specialized molecular readers move along the DNA sequences like fingers following lines of text, translating the chemical letters into instructions that guide the production of proteins, those versatile molecules that serve as both the building blocks and the tools of cellular life. The process by which DNA's chemical language gets translated into the physical reality of your body is one of the most elegant examples of information processing that exists anywhere in the natural world. It begins when certain regions of the DNA are copied into a related molecule called RNA, which serves as a kind of messenger carrying the genetic instructions from the protected vault of the nucleus out into the main workspace of the cell. These RNA messengers carry their precious cargo to specialized factories called ribosomes, which read the chemical letters and use them as instructions for assembling amino acids into proteins. It's a process that happens thousands of times every second in every cell of your body, yet operates with such precision that errors are remarkably rare, creating a molecular assembly line that would make any human manufacturer envious of its efficiency and quality control. As you breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle into the natural rhythms of rest, consider the remarkable fact that this process of reading and interpreting genetic information is happening continuously throughout your body right now. While you lie there peacefully, millions of molecular machines are working quietly to maintain your health, repair any damage that might have occurred during the day, and prepare your body for the restorative processes that happen during sleep. The language of DNA is written using an alphabet of just 4 chemical letters, each one represented by a different type of molecule that can bond with the others in very specific ways. Scientists call these letters A, T, G, and C, which stand for the chemical names of the molecules, but you might think of them as the fundamental vocabulary of life itself. Just as the 26 letters of our familiar alphabet can be combined to create all the words in every book ever written, these 4 chemical letters can be combined in sequences that contain all the information necessary to build and maintain every form of life on Earth. The elegant simplicity of this 4-letter alphabet conceals an almost infinite capacity for storing and transmitting information. The DNA in your cells contains roughly 3 billion of these chemical letters, arranged in sequences that would fill thousands of books if they were translated into ordinary text. Yet this vast library of information is compressed into molecules so small that the entire human genome could fit into a space smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. What makes this molecular language particularly fascinating from the perspective of understanding human ancestry is the way it changes over time. Unlike written languages, where changes usually happen through conscious decisions by writers and speakers, the changes in DNA happen through natural processes that occur during the copying and transmission of genetic information from one generation to the next. Most of the time, this copying process works with remarkable fidelity, creating nearly perfect duplicates of the original DNA sequences. But occasionally, small errors creep in. A single chemical letter might be replaced by a different one, or a short sequence might be accidentally duplicated or deleted. These tiny changes, called mutations, usually have no effect on the organism's health or survival, but they do create subtle variations in the genetic code that can be detected and measured by modern scientific techniques. It's these gentle variations in the DNA sequence that serve as the molecular signatures that allow scientists to trace relationships between different people and different populations. Each family line carries its own unique collection of these molecular markers, like a genetic fingerprint that has been accumulating distinctive features over many generations. By comparing these patterns of variation between different individuals, researchers can determine how closely related they are and estimate how long ago their family lines diverged from a common ancestor. The process of analyzing these genetic relationships requires sophisticated technology and careful statistical analysis, but the basic principle is surprisingly straightforward. The more similar two people's DNA sequences are, the more recently their family lines shared a common ancestor. The more differences that have accumulated, the longer it has been since their ancestors were part of the same family group. This molecular clock operates with remarkable consistency, allowing scientists to estimate not just whether two people are related, but approximately when their most recent common ancestor lived. The rate at which new mutations appear in human DNA has been measured carefully through studies of families with known genealogies, creating a calibration that allows researchers to translate genetic differences into estimates of time with considerable accuracy. As you rest peacefully, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your body relaxes more completely, you might find it comforting to think about the vast network of genetic relationships that this molecular language reveals. Every person alive today carries within their cells a unique combination of genetic markers that tells the story of their ancestry. But these individual stories are all part of a larger narrative that connects every human being to every other through the branching pathways of our shared family tree. The DNA in your cells contains information that reaches back through hundreds of generations, carrying molecular signatures from ancestors who lived in different times and different places, who spoke different languages and lived very different lives, but who all contributed something to the genetic heritage that lives on in your body today. Some of these genetic contributions come from ancestors who lived relatively recently, perhaps just a few generations ago, while others represent ancient lineages that have been preserved and transmitted through countless generations. One of the most remarkable discoveries that has emerged from the study of human DNA is just how recently all human beings shared common ancestors. While the genetic differences between populations from different parts of the world might seem to suggest deep and ancient separations, the molecular evidence reveals that our species is actually quite young in evolutionary terms, and that all human populations are much more closely related than their physical differences might suggest. The techniques that scientists use to read and analyze DNA have become incredibly sophisticated, allowing them to extract and examine genetic material from increasingly small and degraded samples. Modern DNA sequencing machines can read millions of chemical letters in a matter of hours, creating detailed maps of genetic variation that would have taken decades to produce using earlier methods. These technological advances have made it possible to analyze DNA from ancient bones and artifacts, extending our ability to trace human ancestry much further back in time than was previously possible. The information contained in DNA is organized at multiple levels, from the individual genes that code for specific proteins to larger structures that contain hundreds or thousands of genes. Different parts of the genome change at different rates and in different ways, providing multiple independent sources of information about ancestry and relationships. Some regions of DNA are highly conserved, changing very slowly over time and providing information about ancient relationships. Other regions change more rapidly, offering insights into more recent population movements and demographic events. The mitochondrial DNA that exists in the energy-producing structures of your cells provides one particularly valuable source of information about maternal ancestry. Unlike the nuclear DNA that comes from both parents, mitochondrial DNA is inherited exclusively from mothers, creating clear lineages that can be traced back through many generations of female ancestors. The Y-chromosome that is passed from fathers to sons provides similar information about paternal lineages, allowing researchers to trace the movements and relationships of populations through both maternal and paternal lines. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the DNA in your cells as a kind of molecular library that has been carefully maintained and transmitted through countless generations of your ancestors. Each generation has added its own small contributions to this library, while preserving and passing on the accumulated wisdom of all the generations that came before. This genetic library is remarkable not just for the information it contains, but for the way it has been preserved and transmitted across vast spans of time. Unlike written records, which can be lost or destroyed, the genetic record is distributed across millions of individuals, making it virtually indestructible. Even if some lineages are lost, the overall pattern of human genetic relationships remains readable in the DNA of surviving populations. The language written in your DNA connects you not just to your human ancestors, but to all of life on Earth. The same four-letter chemical alphabet that spells out your genetic heritage also contains the instructions for every other living organism, from the smallest bacteria to the largest trees. The basic mechanisms by which DNA stores and transmits information are so fundamental that they have remained essentially unchanged throughout the entire history of life, creating a continuity that spans billions of years. Yet within this ancient and universal language, there are subtle dialects and variations that are uniquely human, markers that distinguish our species from all others and that reveal the specific pathways by which human populations have spread across the Earth and adapted to different environments. These human-specific genetic signatures provide a detailed record of our species' journey from its origins in Africa to its current global distribution, written in molecules that can be read and interpreted with increasing precision by modern scientific methods. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the world settling into rest, you can take comfort in knowing that you are part of this ancient conversation, this molecular dialogue that has been continuing without interruption for countless generations. The DNA in your cells speaks in the same chemical language that has connected all life on Earth since the very beginning. Yet also tells your own unique story, your particular place in the vast and beautiful tapestry of human existence. There's something almost magical about the way tiny changes can accumulate over time to create patterns that tell profound stories about the past. As you rest comfortably, breathing slowly and deeply, imagine watching a single snowflake fall onto a vast, pristine field of snow. That individual snowflake, so small and seemingly insignificant, joins billions of others that have fallen over countless winters, each one adding its tiny contribution to a landscape that records the history of every storm, every season, every year that has passed. This is very much like how genetic changes work across the generations of human families. Each person carries within their DNA the accumulated results of countless tiny molecular events that have happened over thousands of years, creating patterns that are unique to their particular family line, yet connected to the broader story of all human ancestry. These patterns are so subtle that they're completely invisible to ordinary experience, yet so consistent that they can be read like pages from an ancient book, revealing stories about where people came from, how they're related to each other, and what journeys their ancestors took across the face of the earth. The process by which these genetic signatures accumulate happens so gradually and so quietly that it's rather like watching grass grow or paint dry. Imperceptible in the moment, yet unmistakable when viewed across the proper timescale. Every time DNA is copied and passed from one generation to the next, there's a tiny possibility that one of the molecular letters will be changed, creating a new variation that didn't exist in the previous generation. These changes happen at random, with no particular purpose or direction, yet they create a kind of molecular clock that marks the passage of time with remarkable consistency. Most of these genetic changes are so small and occur in parts of the DNA that are so unimportant that they have no effect whatsoever on the person who carries them. They're like tiny typographical errors in a massive encyclopedia. Noticeable if you look closely enough, but not significant enough to change the meaning of the text. Yet it's precisely because these changes are neutral and harmless that they make such excellent markers for tracing ancestry. Unlike changes that affect health or survival, these neutral mutations accumulate steadily over time, creating a molecular record that reflects the true history of population relationships rather than the confusing effects of natural selection. As you lie there peacefully, perhaps feeling your eyelids growing heavier as the day's tensions continue to dissolve into the gentle comfort of evening, try to imagine the invisible process by which your own genetic heritage was assembled over countless generations. Each of your parents contributed half of their DNA to create your unique genetic combination, but their DNA was itself assembled from the contributions of their parents, and so on, stretching back through an unbroken chain that connects you to every human ancestor you've ever had. At each step in this ancestral chain, tiny molecular changes were occurring, creating new genetic variants that would be passed down to future generations. Some of these changes occurred in your direct line of descent, becoming part of your permanent genetic heritage. Others occurred in collateral lines, the DNA of your aunts and uncles, your cousins, and more distant relatives, creating a complex family of related genetic signatures that spread through populations like ripples spreading across a still pond. The beautiful thing about this process is that it creates multiple independent records of ancestry, each one telling the story from a slightly different perspective. The DNA that you inherited from your mother's side of the family carries one set of genetic signatures, while the DNA from your father's side carries a completely different set. These two genetic lineages have been diverging and accumulating their own unique mutations for hundreds or thousands of generations. Yet they came together in your parents' generation to create the unique combination that is your genetic heritage. Scientists have learned to read these overlapping genetic stories with increasing sophistication, using powerful computers to compare the DNA sequences of thousands of people and identify the patterns of relationship that connect them. The process is rather like being a detective who specializes in very ancient crimes, where the evidence consists of tiny molecular clues that have been accumulating for thousands of years, and where the mystery to be solved is not who did what, but who is related to whom, and when their family lines last shared a common ancestor. One of the most remarkable discoveries that has emerged from this genetic detective work is just how much information about ancestry can be extracted from relatively small amounts of DNA. Even a single genetic marker, one position in the DNA where different people have different molecular letters, can provide useful information about relationships and population history. But when hundreds or thousands of these markers are analyzed together, They create a detailed picture of ancestry that can reveal connections and relationships that would be impossible to detect using traditional genealogical methods. The patterns revealed by this genetic analysis often surprise people, showing connections between individuals and populations that seem completely unrelated based on their geography, appearance, or cultural background. Someone living in Europe might discover that they share recent ancestry with someone living in Asia, or someone whose family has lived in one region for many generations might learn that their DNA carries signatures from ancestors who lived on completely different continents. These surprises reflect the complex and often unexpected ways that human populations have moved and mixed throughout history. Unlike the neat categories that people often use to think about ethnicity and population groups, genetic analysis reveals that human ancestry is much more fluid and interconnected than most people realize. The boundaries between different population groups are often much less distinct than they appear, and most people carry genetic heritage from multiple different ancestral sources. As you continue to breathe slowly and peacefully, letting your body sink deeper into the comfortable embrace of rest, you might find it soothing to contemplate the patient way that these genetic stories have been accumulating over countless generations. Each tiny molecular change that occurred in your ancestral lines happened for completely natural reasons, with no conscious intention or purpose. Yet together, they have created a detailed record of your family's journey through time that is more complete and more accurate than any written history could ever be. The timescales involved in reading these genetic stories span a vast range, from relationships that can be detected just a few generations back to connections that reach back hundreds of thousands of years to the earliest origins of our species. Recent relationships show up as large blocks of shared DNA that haven't had time to be broken up by the natural shuffling that occurs during reproduction. More ancient relationships are revealed by smaller, more scattered genetic signatures that have been distributed throughout the genome by thousands of generations of genetic recombination. The process by which these genetic signatures get shuffled and redistributed across generations is one of the most elegant examples of natural randomness creating useful patterns. During the formation of eggs and sperm, the paired chromosomes in each cell undergo a process called recombination, where they exchange segments of DNA in random patterns. This process ensures that each egg or sperm carries a unique combination of genetic material, but also gradually breaks up the large blocks of shared DNA that mark recent relationships, creating the smaller, more scattered patterns that characterize ancient connections. This natural process of genetic shuffling creates a molecular clock that operates with remarkable consistency across all human populations. The rate at which recombination breaks up shared DNA segments has been carefully measured and calibrated, allowing scientists to estimate how many generations have passed since two people shared a common ancestor based on the size and distribution of their shared genetic segments. It's a clock that runs automatically, requiring no maintenance or adjustment, yet provides timestamps that are accurate enough to distinguish between relationships that are separated by just a few generations. The applications of this genetic timekeeping extend far beyond individual family relationships to illuminate the broader patterns of human history and migration. By analyzing the genetic relationships between people from different parts of the world, scientists can trace the pathways by which human populations spread across the globe, estimate when different groups separated from each other, and identify periods when populations that had been separated came back into contact and began exchanging genetic material. These studies have revealed a human history that is far more dynamic and interconnected than previous methods could detect. Rather than a simple pattern of populations spreading out from Africa and remaining isolated in their new homes, genetic analysis shows a complex history of migrations, separations, reunions, and ongoing genetic exchange that continued throughout human prehistory. Populations that seem completely distinct today often show evidence of ancient genetic connections, while groups that live near each other sometimes show surprisingly little evidence of recent genetic exchange. The molecular signatures that reveal these population relationships are preserved not just in the DNA of living people, but also in ancient DNA that can be extracted from archaeological specimens. Bones and teeth that are thousands of years old sometimes preserve enough DNA to be analyzed using modern techniques, providing direct glimpses into the genetic makeup of ancient populations and allowing scientists to trace how genetic relationships have changed over time. This ancient DNA research has produced some of the most surprising discoveries in the field of human genetics, revealing the existence of previously unknown human populations and showing that the genetic landscape of the past was often very different from what we see today. Some populations that were once widespread have disappeared entirely, leaving only traces in the DNA of modern people. Others have persisted in isolated refugia, maintaining ancient genetic signatures that provide windows into much earlier periods of human history. As you rest peacefully in the growing quiet of the evening, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, you might find it comforting to think about the continuity represented by this genetic record. The molecular signatures that scientists can detect in your DNA represent an unbroken chain of inheritance that stretches back through countless generations of your ancestors, each one successfully surviving and reproducing under the conditions of their time, each one contributing their own small part to the genetic heritage that eventually became you. The process by which these genetic whispers have been preserved and transmitted across so many generations speaks to the remarkable stability and reliability of the DNA copying mechanism that operates in every living cell. Despite the countless opportunities for error or loss over thousands of years, the essential information has been preserved with such fidelity that scientists today can detect and analyze genetic events that occurred in your family line hundreds or even thousands of generations ago. This preservation of genetic information across vast timescales provides a kind of molecular immortality, where aspects of your ancestors' genetic makeup continue to exist in your cells today, long after every other trace of their existence has disappeared from the world. In a very real sense, you carry within your body a living memorial to every ancestor you've ever had, a molecular museum that preserves and honors their genetic contributions to your existence. The beauty of this genetic inheritance is that it connects you not just to your direct ancestors, but to the entire human family tree of which you are a part. Every person alive today is connected to every other person through the branching pathways of this great tree, and the genetic signatures that mark these connections provide a scientific foundation for the fundamental unity of our species. No matter how different people might appear or what different cultures they come from, the molecular evidence shows clearly that we are all part of one great human family, sharing common ancestors and common genetic heritage that unites us across all the artificial boundaries that sometimes seem to divide us. As you lie there in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, imagine that flowing through your veins right now is not just the blood that carries oxygen and nutrients to every cell of your body, but also an ancient river of genetic information that has been flowing uninterrupted through the maternal line of your family for thousands upon thousands of years. This river carries within it a very special type of DNA, mitochondrial DNA, that tells one of the most intimate and personal stories that genetics has to offer. The unbroken maternal lineage that connects you directly to every woman who contributed to your existence, stretching back through an ancestry so ancient that it reaches to the very origins of our species. Mitochondrial DNA is unlike any other genetic material in your body, both in where it's found and in how it's inherited. While most of your DNA resides in the protected vault of your cell nuclei, mitochondrial DNA lives in the tiny energy factories called mitochondria that exist by the hundreds in every cell, working constantly to convert the food you eat into the chemical energy that powers every aspect of your existence. These remarkable little structures are like miniature power plants, each one containing its own small circle of DNA that carries the instructions for some of the most fundamental processes of life. What makes mitochondrial DNA particularly fascinating for understanding ancestry is the unique way it gets passed from one generation to the next. Unlike nuclear DNA, which is shuffled and recombined with each generation as genetic material from both parents gets mixed together, Mitochondrial DNA comes exclusively from your mother. When you were conceived, you inherited all of your mitochondria from the egg cell that your mother contributed, and with them came exact copies of her mitochondrial DNA, unchanged by any contribution from your father's side of the family. This means that your mitochondrial DNA is essentially identical to your mother's mitochondrial DNA, which was identical to her mother's, and so on, creating an unbroken chain of genetic inheritance that follows the maternal line back through countless generations. It's like a genetic relay race where the baton passes from mother to daughter to granddaughter, carrying the same essential message across vast spans of time without ever being altered by contributions from fathers or grandfathers. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the peaceful embrace of rest, try to picture this invisible river of maternal inheritance flowing through your family history. Every woman in your direct maternal line, your mother, your mother's mother, your mother's mother's mother, contributed her mitochondrial DNA to this ancient chain, but she also received it unchanged from the woman who came before her, creating a genetic lineage that is both deeply personal and remarkably stable across time. The stability of mitochondrial DNA inheritance makes it an invaluable tool for tracing ancestry, but it doesn't mean that this genetic material never changes. Over the course of many generations, tiny mutations do occur in mitochondrial DNA, creating small variations that distinguish one maternal lineage from another. These mutations happen at a predictable rate, creating a molecular clock that allows scientists to estimate when different maternal lineages diverge from their common ancestors. Because mitochondrial DNA is inherited as a single unit without recombination, these mutations accumulate in a simple, linear fashion that's much easier to analyze than the complex patterns found in nuclear DNA. Each new mutation that occurs becomes a permanent marker of that particular maternal lineage, passed down unchanged to all future generations in that line. Over time, these mutations create distinctive genetic signatures that can be used to identify and trace different maternal lineages with remarkable precision. The study of mitochondrial DNA has revealed some of the most beautiful and profound stories about human ancestry and migration that science has ever uncovered. By comparing the mitochondrial DNA sequences of people from all over the world, researchers have been able to construct a detailed family tree of maternal lineages that shows how all human populations are related through their female ancestors. This mitochondrial family tree reveals patterns of human migration and population relationships that would be impossible to detect using any other method. One of the most remarkable discoveries to emerge from mitochondrial DNA research is that all human beings alive today can trace their maternal ancestry back to a relatively small population of women who lived in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. This doesn't mean that there was only one woman alive at that time. Scientists often refer to mitochondrial Eve as a way of talking about this common ancestor, but this is really a way of referring to the population of women whose mitochondrial DNA lineages are the only ones that survive to the present day. The mitochondrial DNA that flows through your body right now carries signatures that connect you to this ancient African population, but it also carries more recent markers that tell the story of your particular maternal lineage's journey through time and space. Depending on your ancestry, your mitochondrial DNA might carry signatures that mark major migration events, such as the movement of populations out of Africa, the colonization of different continents, or more recent movements within continents as populations expanded and contracted in response to climate changes, conflicts, or economic opportunities. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your consciousness begin to drift like a leaf floating gently downstream, you might find it soothing to contemplate the remarkable journey that your maternal ancestors undertook to bring their genetic heritage to you. Some of your maternal ancestors might have been among the first humans to leave Africa and explore new continents. Others might have been part of populations that survived ice ages in isolated refugia, preserving ancient genetic lineages through thousands of years of challenging conditions. The maternal lineages revealed by mitochondrial DNA often show surprisingly complex patterns of migration and mixing. Rather than simple, linear movements from one place to another, the genetic evidence reveals a history of repeated migrations, population expansions and contractions, and ongoing genetic exchange between populations that have been separated for thousands of years. Your own mitochondrial DNA likely carries signatures from multiple different phases of this complex history, creating a genetic passport that records your maternal lineage's participation in some of the most important events in human prehistory. The resolution of mitochondrial DNA analysis has become so sophisticated that researchers can often identify not just which major population group someone's maternal ancestry comes from, but which specific sublineage within that group, sometimes narrowing down the geographic origin of their maternal ancestors to surprisingly specific regions. This level of detail is possible because mitochondrial DNA evolves relatively quickly compared to nuclear DNA, accumulating enough mutations over the course of a few thousand years to create distinctive signatures for different population groups. One of the most emotionally powerful aspects of mitochondrial DNA research is the way it can reveal unexpected connections between people who might never have suspected they were related. Because mitochondrial DNA lineages can persist for thousands of years, people whose families have lived in completely different parts of the world for many generations sometimes discover that they share recent common maternal ancestors. These discoveries highlight the fundamental interconnectedness of human populations and the relatively recent common origins of our species. The process by which scientists extract and analyze mitochondrial DNA has become increasingly sophisticated and accessible. Unlike nuclear DNA, which requires relatively large samples and complex laboratory procedures, mitochondrial DNA is present in high concentrations in most cells and can often be successfully analyzed from very small samples. This has made it possible to analyze mitochondrial DNA from ancient remains, providing direct glimpses into the genetic makeup of populations that lived thousands of years ago. Ancient mitochondrial DNA research has revealed some of the most surprising discoveries in human genetics, showing that the genetic landscape of the past was often very different from what we see today. Some maternal lineages that were once common have disappeared entirely from modern populations, while others that are rare today were apparently much more widespread in the past. These discoveries provide important insights into the demographic events that have shaped human populations throughout history. The mitochondrial DNA that courses through your body is also remarkable for its role in your daily existence. The mitochondria that carry this ancient genetic heritage are responsible for producing most of the energy that powers your cells, working constantly to convert nutrients into the chemical fuel that keeps you alive. In a very real sense, your maternal ancestors are still working to sustain your life through the mitochondrial machinery they pass down to you. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the thousands of mitochondria in every cell of your body working quietly to keep you healthy and alive. Each one of these tiny organelles carries the same mitochondrial DNA that has been passed down through your maternal line for countless generations, creating a living connection to every woman who contributed to your existence. The study of mitochondrial DNA has also revealed fascinating insights into the relationship between genetics and geography. Different parts of the world are characterized by different collections of mitochondrial lineages, reflecting the historical movements and settlements of human populations. These geographic patterns provide important clues about human migration routes and the timing of major population movements, creating a genetic map of human history that complements and extends the archaeological record. The maternal lineages revealed by mitochondrial DNA also show evidence of the dramatic population changes that have occurred throughout human history. Some lineages show signs of rapid expansion, suggesting periods when particular populations grew quickly and spread across large geographic areas. Others show evidence of population bottlenecks, periods when lineages were reduced to very small numbers before recovering and expanding again. Your own mitochondrial DNA carries within it the record of your maternal ancestors' survival through all of these demographic challenges. Every woman in your maternal line successfully reproduced and passed her genetic heritage to the next generation, surviving whatever environmental, social, or economic challenges characterized her particular time and place. The mitochondrial DNA that flows through your body today represents an unbroken chain of successful mothers stretching back to the very origins of our species. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the world preparing for rest, you can take comfort in knowing that you carry within your body this ancient river of maternal inheritance, connecting you directly to every woman who contributed to your existence and ultimately to the shared maternal heritage of all humanity. The mitochondrial DNA in your cells is both uniquely yours and universally human, a personal genetic signature that simultaneously proclaims your individual ancestry and your membership in the great human family that spans the entire globe. As you rest comfortably in the gentle embrace of the evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, imagine for a moment that you could follow an invisible trail stretching back through time, not a path made of stones or worn earth, but a genetic pathway written in the Y-chromosome that passes from father to son in an unbroken chain reaching back through countless generations of your paternal ancestors. This chromosome, found only in males, carries within its DNA sequences a record as clear and direct as mitochondrial DNA's maternal story, but told from the perspective of the fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers who contributed to your existence through the ancient dance of paternal inheritance. The Y chromosome is perhaps the most remarkable of all human chromosomes, not because of its size. It's actually quite small compared to most others, but because of the unique role it plays in both determining biological sex and preserving an almost perfect record of paternal lineages across vast spans of time. Unlike the other chromosomes in the human genome, which exist in pairs and regularly exchange genetic material with their partners, the Y chromosome has no matching partner with which to recombine. This means that it passes from father to son essentially unchanged, accumulating only the tiny mutations that occur naturally over time, creating a genetic chronicle that follows the paternal line with remarkable fidelity. If you happen to be male, the Y chromosome in your cells is virtually identical to the one your father carried, which was virtually identical to the one his father carried, creating a genetic legacy that connects you directly to every man in your paternal lineage. If you're female, you don't carry a Y chromosome yourself, but you can trace your paternal ancestry through the Y chromosomes carried by your father, your brothers, your paternal uncles, and other male relatives who share your paternal lineage. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the restful rhythm of evening, try to picture this invisible thread of paternal inheritance winding its way through your family history. Unlike the complex shuffling and recombination that characterizes most genetic inheritance, the Y chromosome creates a remarkably simple and direct line of descent, like a genetic relay baton that passes from father to son without ever being altered by contributions from the maternal side of the family. The mutations that do occur in Y chromosomes happen at a predictable rate, creating a molecular clock that allows scientists to estimate when different paternal lineages diverge from their common ancestors. Because these mutations accumulate in a simple, linear fashion without being confused by recombination, they create distinctive signatures that can be used to identify and trace different paternal lineages with remarkable precision. Each new mutation that occurs becomes a permanent marker of that particular paternal lineage, passed down unchanged to all future male descendants in that line. The study of Y chromosome variation has revealed patterns of human migration and population history that complement and extend the stories told by mitochondrial DNA. While mitochondrial DNA traces the movements and relationships of populations through their female ancestors, Y chromosome analysis follows the same populations through their male lineages, often revealing different aspects of the same historical events or uncovering population movements that left different signatures in maternal and paternal genetic lineages. One of the most fascinating discoveries to emerge from Y chromosome research is that, like mitochondrial DNA, all human Y chromosomes can be traced back to a common ancestor, often called Y-chromosome Adam, who lived in Africa roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. This doesn't mean there was only one man alive at that time, but rather that his Y-chromosome lineage is the only one that has survived to the present day among all the Y chromosomes that existed in that ancient population. The Y chromosome that exists in males today carries signatures that connect them to this ancient African population, but also carries more recent markers that tell the story of their particular paternal lineage's journey through time and space. These genetic signatures often reveal surprisingly complex patterns of migration and mixing, showing that human populations have been far more mobile and interconnected throughout history than was previously understood. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to drift like clouds moving slowly across an evening sky, you might find it soothing to contemplate the remarkable journeys that your paternal ancestors undertook to bring their genetic heritage forward through time. Some of your paternal ancestors might have been among the first humans to venture beyond Africa, carrying their Y chromosome lineages into new continents and unknown territories. Others might have been part of later migrations, population expansions, or cultural movements that left their own distinctive marks in the genetic record. The resolution of Y chromosome analysis has become sophisticated enough that researchers can often identify not just which major population group someone's paternal ancestry comes from, but which specific sublineage within that group, sometimes narrowing down the geographic origin of their paternal ancestors to surprisingly specific regions. This level of detail is possible because Y chromosomes, like mitochondrial DNA, evolve relatively quickly, accumulating enough mutations over the course of a few thousand years to create distinctive signatures for different population groups. One of the most emotionally powerful aspects of Y chromosome research is the way it can reveal unexpected connections between men whose families have been separated for many generations. Because Y chromosome lineages can persist for thousands of years, men whose families have lived in completely different parts of the world sometimes discover that they share recent common paternal ancestors. These discoveries often come as complete surprises, highlighting the complex and often unexpected ways that human populations have moved and mixed throughout history. The geographic distribution of Y chromosome lineages reveals fascinating insights into the patterns of human migration and settlement. Different parts of the world are characterized by different collections of Y chromosome lineages, reflecting the historical movements and settlements of male populations. These patterns often differ from those revealed by mitochondrial DNA, suggesting that men and women sometimes participated differently in migration events, or that certain types of population movements left different signatures in maternal and paternal genetic lineages. Some of the most interesting discoveries in Y chromosome research have come from studies of populations that have maintained strong patrilineal traditions, where family identity and inheritance follow the male line. In these populations, Y chromosome lineages often show particularly clear patterns that can be correlated with known historical events, genealogical records, and cultural traditions. These studies have provided important insights into how genetic and cultural inheritance interact, and how social practices can influence the preservation and transmission of genetic lineages. The Y chromosome has also proven valuable for studying more recent historical events, including population movements that occurred within the time frame of written history. Because Y chromosome lineages can be traced with precision over periods of just a few centuries, researchers have been able to use genetic evidence to investigate historical events such as migrations, conquests, colonizations, and other demographic changes that have occurred within the past few thousand years. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the Y chromosome lineages of your paternal ancestors as threads in a vast tapestry that depicts the entire history of human migration and settlement. Each lineage represents a different pathway through time and space, but all of them are interconnected through the branching structure of a human family tree that ultimately connects every person to every other person through shared ancestors. The study of Y chromosome variation has also revealed important insights into the demographic processes that have shaped human populations throughout history. Some lineages show evidence of rapid expansion, suggesting periods when particular populations grew quickly and spread across large geographic areas. Others show evidence of population bottlenecks, periods when lineages were reduced to very small numbers before recovering and expanding again. Your own Y-chromosome lineage, whether you carry it yourself or inherit it through your paternal relatives, carries within it the record of your paternal ancestors' survival through all of these demographic challenges. Every man in your paternal line successfully reproduced and passed his genetic heritage to the next generation, surviving whatever environmental, social, or economic challenges characterized his particular time and place. The mutations that accumulate in Y chromosomes over time create not just markers for tracing ancestry, but also clues about the evolutionary pressures that have shaped human populations. Some regions of the Y chromosome evolve more quickly than others, reflecting different types of selective pressures or demographic processes. By analyzing these patterns of variation, researchers can gain insights into the factors that have influenced human evolution and population dynamics throughout our species' history. The technology for analyzing Y chromosome variation continues to advance rapidly, allowing researchers to examine increasingly detailed patterns of genetic variation and to trace relationships with ever greater precision. Modern DNA sequencing techniques can now read the entire Y chromosome sequence, providing unprecedented resolution for tracing paternal lineages and understanding the processes that have shaped Y chromosome evolution. Ancient DNA research has also begun to provide direct glimpses into the Y chromosome lineages that existed in past populations, allowing researchers to trace how paternal lineages have changed over time and to identify lineages that were once common but have since disappeared from modern populations. These studies are revealing that the genetic landscape of the past was often very different from what we see today, with some lineages that are now rare having been much more widespread in ancient times. The Y chromosome lineages that exist today represent only a small fraction of all the paternal lineages that have existed throughout human history. Many lineages have been lost due to demographic accidents, environmental challenges, or simple random chance. But the lineages that have survived carry within them the collective experience of countless generations of successful fathers who managed to pass their genetic heritage forward through time. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, you can take comfort in knowing that you are connected through Y chromosome inheritance to this ancient and ongoing story of paternal lineages that stretches back to the very origins of our species. Whether you carry a Y chromosome yourself or are connected to one through your paternal relatives, you are part of this genetic legacy that has been preserved and transmitted through countless generations of your ancestors. The paternal lineages revealed by Y chromosome analysis provide a complementary perspective to the maternal stories told by mitochondrial DNA, together creating a more complete picture of human ancestry and migration than either could provide alone. These two independent genetic systems often tell similar stories about population movements and relationships, but they sometimes reveal different aspects of the same events or uncover population processes that affected men and women differently. The combination of Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA analysis has revolutionized our understanding of human prehistory, providing genetic evidence for events and processes that left little or no trace in the archaeological record. Together, these two genetic systems create a molecular record of human history that extends far beyond the reach of written records or oral traditions, allowing us to trace the movements and relationships of human populations across hundreds of thousands of years. There's something almost magical about the moment when two people who have lived their entire lives as complete strangers suddenly discover that they share ancestors, that their family trees branch from the same ancient roots, that flowing through their veins is genetic heritage from the same long-forgotten grandparents who lived perhaps centuries ago. As you rest comfortably in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, imagine the wonder and surprise that must come with such discoveries. The realization that the invisible threads of DNA have been quietly connecting people across vast distances and seemingly insurmountable differences, weaving patterns of relationship that exist far below the surface of ordinary awareness. This is one of the most beautiful and profound gifts that modern genetic analysis has given to our understanding of human relationships. The ability to detect connections between people that would be completely impossible to discover through any other means. Traditional genealogy, with its reliance on written records and family memories, can usually trace relationships back only a few generations before the documentary trail grows cold and the connections become lost in the mists of time. But DNA carries its own permanent record, written in molecules that have been preserved and transmitted with remarkable fidelity across hundreds or even thousands of years. The process by which these hidden relationships come to light is both scientifically sophisticated and emotionally profound. When someone submits a DNA sample for genetic analysis, their genetic information becomes part of vast databases that contain similar information from hundreds of thousands or even millions of other people. Computer algorithms search through these enormous collections of genetic data, looking for patterns of shared DNA segments that indicate recent common ancestry between different individuals. These shared segments of DNA are like molecular fingerprints left behind by common ancestors, genetic signatures that have been preserved and passed down through multiple family lines until they appear in the DNA of living descendants who may have no idea they're related. The size and location of these shared segments can reveal not just that two people are related, but approximately how closely they're related and roughly how many generations have passed since they shared a common ancestor. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the restful rhythm of evening, try to imagine the invisible web of genetic connections that surrounds you, linking you to thousands of people around the world whom you've never met, but who share pieces of your genetic heritage. Some of these connections might be quite recent, representing cousins or more distant relatives whose families separated just a few generations ago. Others might be much more ancient, representing relationships that trace back dozens or even hundreds of generations to ancestors who lived in completely different times and places. The discovery of these genetic relationships often comes as a complete surprise to the people involved. Someone might submit their DNA for analysis, expecting to learn about their ethnic heritage or confirm known family relationships, only to discover that they have close genetic matches with people whose names they've never heard and whose families seem to have no obvious connection to their own. These unexpected discoveries can lead to profound realizations about family history, revealing adoption events, migration patterns, or family separations that have been forgotten or deliberately concealed. One of the most emotionally powerful aspects of genetic relationship discovery is the way it can reunite families that have been separated by circumstances beyond their control. Adoptees who have spent their entire lives wondering about their biological families can now find genetic matches that lead them directly to biological relatives. Families that were separated by wars, natural disasters, or economic hardship can discover that their lost relatives survived and established new families in distant places. The technology that makes these discoveries possible operates with remarkable precision, able to detect relationships between people who share as little as 1% of their DNA, a level of genetic similarity that indicates a relationship roughly equivalent to third or fourth cousins. Even these relatively distant relationships can provide valuable clues about family history and ancestry, especially when multiple related individuals are found in the same geographic region or ethnic population. The databases that power these relationship discoveries continue to grow rapidly as more people contribute their genetic information, creating an increasingly comprehensive map of human genetic relationships. Each new person who submits DNA for analysis potentially provides new connections for thousands of existing participants, revealing previously unknown branches of family trees and filling in gaps in genealogical knowledge that might have remained forever mysterious. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to drift like leaves floating gently on a quiet stream, You might find it comforting to contemplate the way these genetic discoveries highlight the fundamental interconnectedness of human beings. The same molecular mechanisms that reveal surprising relationships between strangers also demonstrate that all human beings are related to each other through the branching pathways of our shared family tree. The differences that sometimes seem to divide people, differences of race, nationality, religion, or culture, become less significant when viewed against the backdrop of our shared genetic heritage. The stories that emerge from genetic relationship discoveries often read like novels, filled with unexpected twists and emotional revelations that transform people's understanding of their own identity and family history. A person who always believed they were descended from one particular ethnic group might discover genetic matches that reveal a much more complex and diverse ancestry. Someone who grew up feeling disconnected from their heritage might find genetic relatives who can provide detailed information about ancestral traditions and family customs. These discoveries also frequently reveal the complex and often hidden ways that human populations have mixed and migrated throughout history. A genetic match between people from different continents might reveal evidence of historical migration events that left no trace in written records. Shared DNA between people from different ethnic backgrounds might indicate periods of cultural exchange and intermarriage that have been forgotten or deliberately obscured by subsequent historical events. The process of following up on genetic matches often leads to the reconstruction of entire family histories that have been lost to time. When multiple genetic relatives are identified in the same region or family line, it becomes possible to piece together genealogical puzzles that would have been impossible to solve using traditional methods. These reconstructed family trees often reveal patterns of migration, settlement, and family formation that provide valuable insights into local and regional history. One of the most fascinating aspects of genetic relationship discovery is the way it can reveal the hidden diversity that exists within apparently homogeneous populations. People who have always considered themselves to be members of a particular ethnic or cultural group often discover genetic matches that reveal much more complex and diverse ancestry than they ever suspected. These discoveries highlight the fact that human populations have been mixing and migrating for thousands of years, creating genetic diversity that exists far below the surface of obvious cultural and physical differences. The emotional impact of discovering unknown genetic relatives can be profound and life-changing. For people who have felt isolated or disconnected from their heritage, finding genetic family can provide a sense of belonging and identity that have been missing from their lives. For those who have always been curious about their ancestry, genetic matches can provide answers to questions that had seemed impossible to resolve. The technology that enables these relationship discoveries continues to advance rapidly, providing increasingly detailed and accurate information about genetic relationships. Modern DNA analysis can now detect much smaller shared segments than was possible just a few years ago, allowing for the identification of more distant relationships and providing more precise estimates of how recently two people shared a common ancestor. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the vast network of genetic relationships that exists all around you, connecting you to people in ways that transcend all the artificial boundaries that sometimes seem to divide humanity. Every person you pass on the street, every face you see in a crowd, every individual whose life briefly intersects with yours might be connected to you through pathways of genetic relationship that reach back through countless generations of shared ancestors. The databases that store genetic information for relationship matching represent one of the largest collaborative efforts in human history, with millions of people contributing their genetic information to create a shared resource that benefits everyone who participates. These databases have become repositories of human genetic diversity that preserve and document the full range of genetic variation that exists within our species. The privacy and ethical considerations surrounding genetic relationship discovery have become increasingly important as these technologies have become more widespread and powerful. While most people are delighted to discover new genetic relatives, These discoveries can sometimes reveal family secrets or personal information that some individuals would prefer to keep private. The genetic testing industry has developed increasingly sophisticated approaches to balancing the benefits of relationship discovery with the need to protect individual privacy and personal autonomy. The scientific insights that emerge from large-scale genetic relationship studies are providing unprecedented insights into human population history and the demographic processes that have shaped our species. By analyzing the patterns of genetic sharing between people from different populations, researchers can trace migration routes, estimate historical population sizes, and identify periods of population expansion or contraction that have influenced human genetic diversity. These studies are also revealing the extent to which human populations have been connected through ongoing genetic exchange throughout history, rather than discrete, isolated groups that developed independently. The genetic evidence shows that human populations have maintained varying levels of contact and genetic exchange across vast distances and long time periods, creating the complex patterns of genetic diversity that characterize modern human populations. The future of genetic relationship discovery promises even more sophisticated and powerful tools for connecting people with their genetic relatives and understanding their place in the human family tree. As genetic databases continue to grow and analytical techniques become more advanced, it will become possible to detect increasingly distant relationships and to trace family connections across longer time periods with greater precision. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, you can take comfort in knowing that you are part of this vast network of genetic relationships that connects every human being to every other human being through the invisible threads of shared DNA. Whether or not you ever choose to explore your own genetic relationships, you carry within your cells the molecular signatures that connect you to countless other people around the world, creating bonds of kinship that exist far below the surface of ordinary awareness, but that represent one of the most fundamental truths about human existence: that we are all, quite literally, members of one great human family. Imagine, if you will, that you could unfurl a vast map of the Earth as it existed tens of thousands of years ago. Not the familiar world of today, with its established nations and well-traveled routes, but a planet where vast ice sheets covered much of the northern continents, where sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are now, and where small groups of human beings were beginning the greatest journey in our species' history, the gradual exploration and settlement of an entire planet. As you rest comfortably in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, picture these ancient travelers carrying within their cells not just the hopes and dreams that motivated their journeys, but also the genetic codes that would serve as permanent records of their epic migrations across continents and oceans. The story of human migration is written in DNA like an ancient epic poem, preserved in molecular verse that has been passed down through countless generations of travelers and settlers. Every major population movement, every crossing of geographic barriers, every establishment of new communities in distant lands has left its signature in the genetic heritage of modern populations, creating a record of human wandering that is more complete and more accurate than any written history could ever be. These genetic signatures of migration are like molecular breadcrumbs scattered along the pathways that our ancestors took as they gradually spread across the globe. When populations move from one place to another, they carry with them their unique genetic characteristics, establishing new communities that preserve and transmit these molecular markers to future generations. Over time, the accumulation of new mutations and the effects of genetic drift create distinctive patterns that mark the descendants of these migrant populations, allowing scientists to trace the routes they took and estimate when these great journeys occurred. The most fundamental migration story written in human DNA is the initial expansion of our species out of Africa, an event that occurred roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago when small groups of early humans first ventured beyond the continent where our species evolved. This expansion marked the beginning of humanity's transformation from an African species to a global one, setting in motion a series of migrations that would eventually carry human populations to every habitable continent on Earth. The genetic evidence for this out-of-Africa migration is remarkably clear and consistent across different types of DNA analysis. Both mitochondrial DNA and Y-chromosome studies point to the same basic pattern. All non-African populations descended from a relatively small group of migrants who carried with them only a subset of the genetic diversity that existed in Africa at that time. This founding population bottleneck has left permanent signatures in the DNA of all non-African populations, creating patterns of genetic variation that clearly mark them as descendants of African immigrants. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the restful rhythm of evening, try to imagine the courage and curiosity that must have motivated these first human immigrants as they ventured into unknown territories beyond the familiar landscapes of their African homeland. These were not mass migrations involving thousands of people, but rather small groups of perhaps a few dozen or a few hundred individuals who gradually expanded their range in search of new resources, new opportunities, or simply driven by the restless human urge to explore what lies beyond the next horizon. The routes that these early migrants took out of Africa have been reconstructed through careful analysis of genetic patterns in modern populations. The most likely pathway led through the Middle East and along the coastlines of southern Asia, following routes that would have been accessible even during periods when sea levels were much lower than they are today. These coastal migrations allowed early human populations to spread rapidly across vast distances, following shorelines that provided reliable sources of food and water while avoiding the more challenging inland routes through deserts and mountain ranges. From these initial footholds in the Middle East and southern Asia, human populations continued to spread in multiple directions, gradually colonizing new continents and adapting to new environments. Some groups moved northward into Central Asia and eventually into Europe, while others continued eastward along the Asian coastlines, eventually reaching Australia and New Guinea roughly 50,000 years ago in what represents one of the most remarkable achievements in human prehistory, the first deliberate ocean crossings by our species. The genetic signatures of these ancient migrations are preserved in the DNA of modern populations with remarkable clarity. European populations carry genetic markers that clearly identify them as descendants of migrants who moved into Europe from the Middle East and Central Asia. Asian populations show evidence of multiple migration streams that entered the continent from different directions and at different times. Australian Aboriginal populations carry some of the clearest genetic signatures of the early coastal migration route, preserving ancient genetic lineages that have remained relatively isolated for tens of thousands of years. One of the most fascinating aspects of human migration genetics is the way it reveals the complex interplay between geography, climate, and population movement. The timing of major migration events often correlates with periods of climate change that either opened new migration routes or forced populations to seek new homes as their traditional territories became uninhabitable. The end of ice ages, changes in sea level, and shifts in rainfall patterns all left their marks on human migration patterns, creating genetic signatures that can still be detected in modern populations. The colonization of the Americas represents one of the most intensively studied migration events in human history, both because of its relatively recent timing and because of the clear genetic signatures it left in Native American populations. The genetic evidence indicates that the Americas were initially populated by migrants from Northeast Asia who crossed the Bering Land Bridge during the last ice age, roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. These founding populations carried distinctive genetic markers that are still preserved in Native American populations today, creating clear evidence of their Asian origins. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to drift like clouds moving slowly across an evening sky, you might find it soothing to contemplate the remarkable achievement represented by these ancient migrations. Over the course of just a few thousand generations, human populations spread from a single continent to every habitable landmass on Earth, adapting to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, from high mountain plateaus to low-lying islands scattered across vast oceans. The genetic record of these migrations reveals not just the routes that ancient populations took, but also the challenges they faced and overcame along the way. Population bottlenecks marked by reduced genetic diversity indicate periods when migrant groups were reduced to very small numbers, perhaps due to environmental challenges, disease, or other demographic catastrophes. Subsequent population expansions marked by increased genetic diversity show periods when these groups recovered and grew, successfully adapting to their new environments and establishing stable communities. The technology for tracing ancient migrations through DNA analysis has become increasingly sophisticated, allowing researchers to detect increasingly subtle patterns of population movement and mixing. Modern genetic analysis can distinguish between different migration waves that occurred thousands of years apart, identify the likely geographic origins of migrant populations with remarkable precision, and even estimate the sizes of founding populations and the demographic processes that shape their subsequent development. Ancient DNA research has added an entirely new dimension to migration studies by providing direct genetic evidence from archaeological specimens. DNA extracted from ancient bones and artifacts can reveal the genetic characteristics of populations that lived thousands of years ago, allowing researchers to trace how genetic patterns have changed over time and to identify migration events that might not be detectable in modern populations alone. These ancient DNA studies have revealed some surprising discoveries about human migration patterns, showing that the genetic landscape of the past was often very different from what we see today. Some populations that were once widespread have disappeared entirely, leaving only traces in the DNA of other groups. Other populations have maintained remarkable genetic continuity over thousands of years, preserving ancient genetic signatures that provide windows into much earlier periods of human history. The genetic evidence for human migration also reveals the extent to which populations have continued to move and mix throughout history, long after the initial colonization of different continents. Rather than simple patterns of dispersal followed by isolation, the genetic record shows ongoing migration, population replacement, and genetic exchange that continued throughout the prehistoric period and into historical times. Some of the most dramatic migration events revealed by genetic analysis occurred relatively recently, within the time frame of written history. The expansion of Bantu-speaking populations across sub-Saharan Africa, the Polynesian colonization of Pacific Islands, and the European colonization of the Americas all left clear genetic signatures that could be traced through DNA analysis. These more recent migrations often involved much larger populations and more complex demographic processes than the earlier prehistoric migrations. The genetic signatures of migration are not just historical curiosities, but have practical implications for understanding modern human genetic diversity and health. The population bottlenecks and founder effects associated with migration events have influenced the distribution of genetic variants that affect disease, susceptibility, drug metabolism, and other medically relevant traits. Understanding migration history is therefore important for developing personalized medical treatments and understanding the genetic basis of health disparities between different populations. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the DNA in your own cells as a molecular passport that records your ancestors' participation in some of these great migration events. Depending on your ancestry, your genetic heritage might carry signatures from multiple different migration streams, reflecting the complex movements and mixings that have characterized human populations throughout history. The study of migration genetics has also revealed the remarkable adaptability of human populations to new environments. As migrant groups encountered new climates, new food sources, and new disease environments, they underwent genetic adaptations that helped them survive and thrive in their new homes. These adaptations often occurred remarkably quickly in evolutionary terms, showing that human populations can respond to new selective pressures within just a few thousand years. Some of the most striking examples of rapid genetic adaptation are found in populations that colonized extreme environments. The genetic adaptations that allow Tibetan populations to thrive at high altitude, the modifications that help Inuit populations cope with Arctic conditions, and the changes that allow certain African populations to digest milk into adulthood all represent relatively recent evolutionary responses to the challenges posed by new environments. The ongoing analysis of human migration genetics continues to reveal new insights into our species' remarkable journey across the planet. As more populations contribute their genetic information to research studies, and as analytical techniques become more sophisticated, the picture of human migration becomes increasingly detailed and nuanced, revealing the full complexity of the processes that have shaped modern human genetic diversity. The genetic record of human migration also highlights the fundamental unity of our species, despite the obvious differences that exist between populations from different parts of the world. All human populations, regardless of how long they have been separated or how different they might appear, share common ancestors within the relatively recent past and carry genetic evidence of their participation in the same basic migration story that spread humanity across the globe. As you rest comfortably in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, imagine for a moment that you could peer back through the mists of deep time to a world that existed perhaps 50,000 years ago, when the story of humanity was far more complex and mysterious than anyone could have imagined just a few decades ago. In this ancient world, modern humans were not the only human species walking the earth. Other forms of humanity, our evolutionary cousins, also inhabited various corners of the planet, living their own lives, developing their own cultures, and following their own pathways through the great adventure of existence. These ancient cousins of ours have left traces of their existence not just in the fossil record, but in something far more intimate and personal, the DNA that flows through your own veins right now. As you lie there peacefully, surrounded by the quiet sounds of evening settling around you, you carry within your cells genetic heritage from human species that vanished from the earth tens of thousands of years ago, yet continue to live on through the molecular legacy they left in the genomes of modern human populations. The discovery of this ancient genetic heritage represents one of the most remarkable and unexpected revelations in the history of human genetics. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed that modern humans had evolved in isolation, gradually replacing earlier human forms without any genetic mixing or interbreeding. The story seemed clean and simple. Modern humans emerged in Africa, spread across the globe, and the other human species that had existed previously simply disappeared, leaving behind only fossil evidence of their existence. But the reality, as revealed by the careful analysis of ancient DNA extracted from fossil remains, turned out to be far more complex and far more interesting. When scientists first succeeded in extracting and analyzing DNA from Neanderthal bones discovered in European caves, they made a discovery that fundamentally changed our understanding of human evolution. The genetic material of these ancient human cousins was similar enough to modern human DNA that interbreeding had clearly occurred, leaving permanent traces in the genomes of people alive today. The Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary relatives, lived across Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before disappearing roughly 30,000 years ago. They were sophisticated humans in their own right, with complex tool technologies, evidence of symbolic behavior, and brains that were actually larger on average than those of modern humans. When early modern humans began expanding out of Africa and into the territories where Neanderthals had long been established, the two species encountered each other and, despite their evolutionary differences, occasionally formed intimate relationships that produced offspring. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the restful rhythm of evening, try to imagine these ancient encounters between our direct ancestors and their Neanderthal cousins. These meetings probably occurred over many thousands of years, as small groups of modern humans gradually expanded their range into territories that had been occupied by Neanderthal populations for countless generations. Some of these encounters might have been hostile, but others clearly involved enough cooperation and mutual acceptance to allow for the formation of mixed families and the birth of children who carried genetic heritage from both species. The genetic evidence for this interbreeding is remarkably clear and consistent across different modern human populations. People of European and Asian descent typically carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, distributed in small segments scattered throughout their chromosomes. These Neanderthal genetic sequences represent ancient molecular fossils, preserved and transmitted through hundreds of generations of human ancestors, creating a living connection to our evolutionary cousins that extends far beyond anything that could be learned from archaeological remains alone. But the Neanderthals were not the only ancient human species that contributed to modern human genetic heritage. In 2010, analysis of DNA extracted from a tiny finger bone discovered in a cave in Siberia revealed the existence of an entirely previously unknown human species that scientists named the Denisovans, after the cave where the fossil was found. Like the Neanderthals, the Denisovans also interbred with modern humans, leaving genetic signatures that can still be detected in certain modern populations. The Denisovan genetic contribution is particularly prominent in populations from Melanesia, including Papua New Guinea and surrounding islands, where people carry as much as 5 or 6% Denisovan DNA in their genomes. This pattern suggests that the interbreeding between modern humans and Denisovans occurred in Asia, probably as modern human populations were expanding through the region on their way to Australia and the Pacific Islands. The Denisovan genetic heritage carried by these populations represents genes that were acquired tens of thousands of years ago, but continue to influence the biology and characteristics of people living today. The discovery of Denisovan genetic heritage was particularly remarkable because it was made entirely through DNA analysis, without any significant fossil remains to indicate what these ancient humans actually looked like. The genetic material revealed the existence of an entire human species that had been completely unknown to science, demonstrating the power of ancient DNA analysis to reveal aspects of human evolution that would be impossible to detect through traditional archaeological methods. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to drift like leaves floating gently on a quiet stream, you might find it fascinating to contemplate the fact that you almost certainly carry genetic material from these ancient human cousins in your own cells. If your ancestry includes people from Europe, Asia, or the Pacific Islands, then scattered throughout your genome are small segments of DNA that were originally carried by Neanderthals or Denisovans who lived tens of thousands of years ago. These ancient genetic contributions are not just historical curiosities, but have practical implications for your biology and health. Some of the genes inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans appear to have provided advantages that helped modern human populations adapt to new environments as they spread across the globe. Neanderthal genes related to immune system function may have helped modern humans cope with new diseases they encountered as they expanded into European and Asian environments where Neanderthals have been living for hundreds of thousands of years. Similarly, some Denisovan genes appear to have provided advantages for living at high altitudes. The genetic variant that helps Tibetan populations cope with the low oxygen levels found on high mountain plateaus appears to have been inherited from Denisovans, representing a clear example of how ancient interbreeding provided modern humans with genetic tools for adapting to extreme environments. The process by which scientists extract and analyze ancient DNA from fossil remains is both technically challenging and remarkably sophisticated. DNA degrades over time, breaking down into smaller and smaller fragments until eventually nothing recoverable remains. In most environments, DNA preservation is so poor that genetic material disappears entirely within a few thousand years. But under certain conditions, particularly in cold, dry caves or in permafrost, DNA can be preserved for much longer periods, sometimes tens of thousands of years. The extraction and analysis of ancient DNA requires extreme care to avoid contamination with modern genetic material, which could easily overwhelm the small amounts of ancient DNA that survive in fossil remains. Scientists working with ancient DNA must use specialized laboratory facilities and rigorous protocols to ensure that the genetic sequences they analyze actually come from ancient individuals rather than from modern contamination. The technology for analyzing ancient DNA has advanced rapidly in recent years, allowing scientists to extract genetic information from increasingly old and degraded specimens. Modern techniques can now analyze DNA from specimens that are hundreds of thousands of years old, pushing back the timeline for genetic analysis of human evolution and providing insights into much earlier periods of human prehistory than was previously possible. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine the remarkable journey that these ancient genetic sequences have taken to reach you. The Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA in your cells was originally carried by individuals who lived completely different lives in completely different worlds. Yet through the long chain of reproduction and inheritance, their genetic material has been preserved and transmitted across hundreds of generations to become part of your own biological heritage. The discovery of widespread interbreeding between modern humans and other human species has fundamentally changed our understanding of human evolution and the relationships between different human forms. Rather than a simple linear progression from earlier to more advanced human types, the genetic evidence reveals a complex network of related species that occasionally interbred and exchanged genetic material, creating the mosaic of genetic heritage that characterizes modern human populations. This more complex picture of human evolution highlights the fluid and interconnected nature of human species boundaries. The ability of different human species to interbreed and produce viable offspring suggests that the differences between them were not as fundamental as scientists once believed. Modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans were all variations on the same basic human theme, different enough to have evolved distinctive characteristics, but similar enough to share genetic material and contribute to each other's evolutionary legacy. The ongoing analysis of ancient human DNA continues to reveal new insights into the complexity of human evolution and the relationships between different human populations. Recent discoveries have identified additional human species and populations that also contributed to modern human genetic heritage, creating an increasingly detailed picture of the various human forms that existed in the past and the ways they interacted with each other. Some of these newly discovered ancient human populations appear to have been isolated for long periods, developing distinctive genetic characteristics that were later incorporated into modern human populations through interbreeding events. These discoveries suggest that human evolution was even more complex than previously imagined, with multiple human species and populations contributing to the genetic heritage of modern humans through a network of occasional interbreeding events spanning hundreds of thousands of years. The implications of these discoveries extend beyond human evolution to influence our understanding of what it means to be human and how we relate to other forms of life. The genetic evidence shows clearly that modern humans are not the product of a single, pure evolutionary lineage, but rather the result of a complex process of mixing and merging between different human forms that each contributed their own distinctive genetic legacy to our species. This more inclusive understanding of human evolution emphasizes the collaborative rather than competitive aspects of human development. Rather than simply replacing other human forms through superior adaptation or technology, modern humans appear to have succeeded partly by incorporating useful genetic material from other human species, creating a more diverse and adaptable genetic heritage than any single human lineage could have achieved alone. The ancient human DNA that flows through your veins represents a tangible connection to this complex evolutionary heritage, linking you not just to your immediate human ancestors, but to the broader family of human species that contributed to your genetic makeup. Every person alive today is a living repository of genetic material from multiple human sources, carrying within their cells the accumulated wisdom of hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution and adaptation. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, you can take comfort in knowing that you are part of this ancient and ongoing story of human cooperation and genetic sharing. The DNA in your cells represents not just your own individual genetic heritage, but the collective genetic heritage of multiple human species that work together, consciously or unconsciously, to create the genetic foundation for modern human existence. The discovery of our genetic connections to ancient human cousins provide the scientific foundation for a more inclusive and collaborative understanding of human identity. Rather than seeing ourselves as the sole inheritors of human evolutionary success, we can understand ourselves as the beneficiaries of genetic contributions from multiple human forms, each of which played a role in creating the biological foundation for human life as we know it today. As you rest comfortably in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, imagine the quiet laboratories where researchers around the world continue to work late into the night, carefully extracting DNA from tiny samples, analyzing genetic sequences with sophisticated computers, and making discoveries that add new chapters to the ever-expanding story of human connection and ancestry. This is not a story that ended with ancient migrations or prehistoric interbreeding events, but rather a living, ongoing narrative that continues to unfold as new technologies reveal previously hidden relationships, and as more people contribute their genetic information to the great collaborative project of understanding human heritage. The field of genetic ancestry research is advancing so rapidly that discoveries that seemed impossible just a few years ago are now becoming routine parts of genetic analysis. Each month brings new insights into human population history, new methods for extracting information from ancient specimens, and new connections between modern populations and their ancestral origins. The databases that store genetic information from millions of people continue to grow exponentially, creating an increasingly comprehensive map of human genetic relationships that extends both deeper into the past and more broadly across all human populations. One of the most exciting frontiers in genetic ancestry research involves the analysis of increasingly ancient DNA specimens. Scientists have now succeeded in extracting genetic material from human remains that are hundreds of thousands of years old, pushing back the timeline for genetic analysis far beyond what was thought possible just a decade ago. These ancient specimens are providing direct glimpses into the genetic makeup of early human populations, revealing how human genetics has changed over time and identifying previously unknown episodes of population mixing and migration. The technology for analyzing modern DNA samples is also becoming increasingly sophisticated, allowing researchers to extract more detailed information about ancestry and relationships from smaller amounts of genetic material. New sequencing technologies can now read entire genomes quickly and affordably, providing unprecedented resolution for tracing family relationships and population histories. Machine learning algorithms can identify subtle patterns in genetic data that would be impossible for human analysts to detect, revealing previously hidden relationships and ancestral connections. As you continue to breathe slowly and deeply, letting your body settle more completely into the restful rhythm of evening, try to imagine the vast network of genetic information that now exists in databases around the world, connecting millions of people through shared DNA segments and common ancestral lineages. This network continues to grow and become more complex as new participants join genetic research studies and contribute their own genetic information to the collective pool of human genetic knowledge. Each new person who submits DNA for analysis potentially provides new connections for thousands of existing participants, filling in gaps in family trees and revealing previously unknown branches of human ancestry. These discoveries often lead to profound personal revelations as people learn about parts of their heritage they never knew existed, discover relatives in unexpected places, or uncover family histories that have been lost to time. The democratization of genetic testing has made ancestry analysis accessible to millions of people who previously would never have had the opportunity to explore their genetic heritage. Direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies now offer sophisticated ancestry analysis at costs that are affordable for many families, allowing ordinary people to participate in the great project of mapping human genetic relationships. These commercial services have created genetic databases that include participants from every continent and every major population group, providing researchers with genetic information from human populations that have never before been systematically studied. The scientific insights emerging from these large-scale genetic studies are revolutionizing our understanding of human population history and the processes that have shaped human genetic diversity. Researchers can now trace population movements with unprecedented precision, identify specific migration routes and timing, and detect episodes of population mixing that occurred thousands of years ago but left lasting signatures in modern genetic patterns. These studies are also revealing the extent to which human populations have been connected through ongoing genetic exchange throughout history, rather than discrete, isolated groups that developed independently. The genetic evidence shows that human populations have maintained varying levels of contact and gene flow across vast distances and long time periods, creating the complex patterns of genetic diversity that characterize modern human populations. As you rest peacefully, perhaps feeling your thoughts beginning to drift like clouds moving slowly across an evening sky, you might find it comforting to think about the way genetic research is creating new forms of human connection and understanding. People who participate in genetic ancestry studies often report feeling more connected to the broader human family as they learn about their genetic relationships to people from different parts of the world and different cultural backgrounds. The ongoing expansion of genetic databases is also enabling new types of research that were impossible when genetic information was available from only limited populations. Researchers can now study how genetic variants are distributed across different populations, trace the evolutionary history of specific genes, and identify genetic adaptations that help human populations survive and thrive in different environments. Medical genetics is being transformed by the insights emerging from ancestry research, as scientists learn how population history has influenced the distribution of disease-related genetic variants. Understanding the ancestral origins of different populations helps researchers develop more effective treatments for genetic diseases and provides insights into why certain conditions are more common in some populations than others. The ethical considerations surrounding genetic ancestry research continue to evolve as these technologies become more powerful and more widely used. Questions about genetic privacy, the ownership of genetic information, and the potential for genetic discrimination have become increasingly important as genetic databases grow and genetic analysis becomes more sophisticated. The scientific community continues to develop policies and practices that balance the tremendous benefits of genetic research with the need to protect individual rights and privacy. Educational initiatives are helping people understand both the potential benefits and the limitations of genetic ancestry testing. While genetic analysis can provide remarkable insights into family history and population origins, it's important for people to understand that genetic ancestry is just one aspect of identity and heritage, and that cultural and family traditions are equally important in defining who we are and where we come from. The field of genetic ancestry research is also becoming increasingly international and collaborative, with researchers from different countries working together to study human population history and genetic diversity. These collaborations are essential for understanding global patterns of human migration and genetic relationships, as they require genetic information from populations around the world and expertise in analyzing complex patterns of genetic variation. As our long journey through the molecular landscape of human ancestry draws to its peaceful close, you find yourself floating in a gentle sea of genetic connection that extends far beyond anything you might have imagined when we first began this exploration together. The DNA that flows through your body, which perhaps seemed like an abstract biological concept when we started, has revealed itself to be something far more profound and beautiful. A living library that connects you to every human being who has ever existed, a molecular thread that weaves you into the vast tapestry of human experience that stretches back through countless generations to the very origins of our species. As you rest here in the gentle embrace of evening, breathing slowly and peacefully, You carry within your cells the accumulated genetic wisdom of hundreds of thousands of years of human history. Every breath you take is supported by mitochondria that carry DNA sequences passed down through an unbroken maternal lineage reaching back to the earliest human mothers. Every heartbeat is guided by genetic instructions that have been refined and preserved through countless generations of successful human ancestors who survived famines and plagues, ice ages and droughts, migrations and adaptations that shape the genetic heritage you carry today. The story written in your DNA is both deeply personal and universally human. It tells of your particular family's journey through time and space, recording the specific pathways your ancestors took as they moved across continents and adapted to new environments. Yet it also tells the broader story of our entire species, documenting the shared experiences that unite all human beings through our common evolutionary heritage and our participation in the same great adventure of human existence. The genetic connections revealed by modern DNA analysis provide a scientific foundation for the most profound spiritual and philosophical insights about human nature and human relationships. The molecular evidence shows clearly that all human beings are quite literally family, connected through genetic relationships that reach back through recent generations to ancient common ancestors who lived in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. The differences that sometimes seem to divide people, differences of race, nationality, religion, or culture, become less significant when viewed against the backdrop of this shared genetic heritage. Your DNA carries within it genetic contributions from human ancestors who lived radically different lives in radically different times and places. Some of your ancestors were hunter-gatherers who knew how to read the subtle signs of weather and season, who could track animals across vast landscapes, who lived in intimate connection with the natural world. Others were early farmers who learned to coax food from the soil, who built the first permanent settlements, who began the long process of transforming wild landscapes into human communities. Some of your ancestors were migrants who had the courage to leave familiar territories and venture into unknown lands, carrying their families and their genetic heritage across oceans and continents in search of new opportunities. Others were the established residents who welcomed these migrants, whose own genetic heritage became mingled with that of newcomers to create new populations with new characteristics and new possibilities. As you breathe slowly and peacefully, letting the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you deeper into relaxation, you might imagine all of these ancestral contributors gathering around you like a loving family, each one proud to have played a role in bringing you into existence. The DNA you carry represents their collective gift to you, their genetic investment in the future, their way of ensuring that something of their own existence would continue beyond their individual lifetimes. The genetic heritage you carry is not static, but continues to evolve and change with each generation. If you have children or grandchildren, you will pass on portions of your genetic inheritance to them, but in new combinations that have never existed before and will never exist again in exactly the same form. Your genetic legacy will become part of their story, just as the genetic legacies of your ancestors have become part of yours. The ongoing research in human genetics continues to reveal new aspects of this ancient story, uncovering previously unknown chapters in human history and identifying new connections between modern populations and their ancestral origins. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of the complex and beautiful processes that have shaped human genetic diversity, creating an ever more detailed picture of how we are all connected through the molecular threads of shared DNA. The databases that store genetic information from millions of people around the world represent one of humanity's greatest collaborative achievements, a shared resource that benefits everyone who participates and contributes to our collective understanding of human heritage. These databases will continue to grow and become more comprehensive, eventually creating a complete map of human genetic relationships that connects every person to every other person through the branching pathways of our shared family tree. The ethical responsibilities that come with genetic knowledge are as important as the scientific insights themselves. As we learn more about human genetic relationships and ancestry, We also learn more about the fundamental equality and unity of our species. The genetic evidence provides clear scientific support for the principle that all human beings deserve equal respect and dignity, regardless of their ancestry or origin. The personal significance of genetic ancestry information varies greatly from person to person. For some, learning about their genetic heritage provides a sense of connection and identity that enriches their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. For others, genetic information is interesting but less important than the cultural and family traditions that have shaped their identity. Both perspectives are valid and important, and genetic ancestry should be understood as one valuable source of information about heritage rather than the only or most important source. As you settle more deeply into the peaceful embrace of evening, perhaps beginning to feel the gentle pull of sleep as your breathing becomes even slower and more rhythmic, you can take comfort in knowing that you are held safely within the vast network of genetic connection that encompasses all of humanity. You are never truly alone, because you carry within your cells the genetic heritage of countless ancestors who faced their own challenges with courage and determination, who found ways to survive and thrive and pass their genetic legacy forward to future generations. The DNA that flows through your body connects you not just to your human ancestors, but to all of life on Earth. The same basic genetic code that spells out your human characteristics also contains the instructions for every other living organism, creating a molecular kinship that extends far beyond our own species to encompass the entire community of life on our planet. In the quiet moments before sleep, as your consciousness begins to drift like a leaf floating gently on a peaceful stream, you might find comfort in this vast genetic embrace that connects you to all of life, all of time, all of the remarkable journey that has brought consciousness and awareness and love into existence on this small planet in an infinite universe. You are part of something much larger than yourself. Yet you are also completely and uniquely yourself, carrying a combination of genetic information that has never existed before and will never exist again. Rest now in the knowledge that you are both an individual and a part of the great human family, both unique in your particular genetic combination and connected through invisible molecular threads to every other human being who has ever lived or ever will live. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing carry you peacefully towards sleep, supported by the ancient genetic wisdom that flows through your cells, embraced by the vast network of human connection that stretches across all of time and space, held safely within the loving arms of deep ancestry that connects you to the very origins of human consciousness and human love. The story written in your DNA is a story of survival and hope, of adaptation and resilience, of love and family, and the endless human capacity to create meaning and beauty in the face of uncertainty and change. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that you are part of this ancient and ongoing story, and that your own life contributes new chapters to the great book of human experience that will continue to be written by future generations who carry forward the genetic legacy that flows through your dreams.